guys, welcome to today's video. Today is the next part on the how to make a fursuit head tutorial. So to start off, we are patterning the head. Now this is pretty similar to how I showed you guys how to pattern the horns in the last video. I'm just laying down tape everywhere, pretty much. For this head, I'm only taping half of it because the pattern is symmetrical and my base is symmetrical as well. If your pattern is different on either side, you may have to tape the whole head, as well as if your base is different on both sides. Make sure that the tape lays flat and covers all the curves and the shapes of the foam base. It should look something like this when you're done. I then take some Glad wrap, you could use anything that's kind of stretchy and clingy, and I tape this to the top of the head and down the neck of my mannequin head. This is to pattern for the neck piece. I found that this technique makes a really nice form-fitting neck piece that you can get on and off without a zipper but still looks really nice. So again, I just lay the tape down where I want the neck piece to be, making sure that I follow the curves of the neck and the shoulder of the mannequin. Once everything is taped up, I take a metallic marker and I start drawing in all the markings of the character. Once I have the markings drawn in, I also draw the seams and I label everything and I add the direction that the fur is going in with little arrows all over the head. It should look something like this when you're done. Make sure that you take photos and you know what it's supposed to look like because it's hard to tell once everything is off the head. For the little cheek tufts, I just cut out a piece of paper and just tested the fit of it, and once I liked it, I was good to go. Then I start cutting off the pattern pieces from the head, being really careful not to cut the foam, and I stick these onto just some A4 paper once they're off the head so that there's no sticky sides. For any pieces that have curves in them, you may have to add some darts, which is basically where you cut the pattern until it lays flat, and then you sew those little cuts back up once you have the fur cut out. I then get to work cutting them out of the paper so that we have lots of nice, smooth pieces, pattern pieces to cut out of our fur. And I've separated these into colour just so it's a little bit easier to cut out. I've got the fur colours and then the minky colours together. For the minky, I'm using white minky for the insides of the ears. This is just the design of the character. And I just trace those onto my minky, one for each side, marking which one is one side. I put a little X on a certain one. And I use about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters of seam allowance because these are hand stitched and you just don't need that much seam allowance. Then I do the same for the nose on my purple minky, and I just erase the middle seam and flip one over so it's one big top piece for the top section. I hope that kind of makes sense. You'll see what I mean when it goes on the head. I then get to work on cutting out my fur. I'm just doing the purple first because that's what I decided to do first. Again, marking everything, doing one for each side. I put a little X on the ones that are going to be on one side and nothing on the ones that are going to be on the other side, and make sure that I'm labeling things as well. For the purple I didn't really label because the shapes were enough to remind me, but for the other colour I labelled everything. And then I just start cutting it out, being really careful not to cutting the back of the fur. You can use an X-Acto knife, but I find scissors are just a little bit easier to control and they don't rip the fur backing. Again, I'm only using about 1 mil to 2 mil of seam allowance because we're hand stitching this suit. Then I'm moving on to the teal fur. I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm marking down all of my pieces, one for each side, and just labeling them and leaving a little bit of seam allowance. For the neck pieces it looks kind of confusing, but basically I've just labelled whether it's the front, side, back, and then what it attaches to on either side as well. And these are all our pieces. This took me a very long time to cut out, and I won't make you watch me do that. This is the final pile of fluff. Now I've separated them into pieces that need to be shaved, pieces that don't need to be shaved, and then these two long pieces that are the stripe down the front, which will be half shaved, but I'm going to do that once they're already on the head. I then get to work on shaving. I use a dog groomer. I think it's a Wall KM2 Speed from memory, and it's pretty nice. I really like it. Make sure you take your time with the shaving. It does take a while and it takes some practice to get right. Make sure you're not cutting down too low or sort of cutting into the backing of the fabric either. I then start sewing the nose together. To start with, I'm just sewing the center seam that goes down the middle of the bottom of the nose, and I'm just doing a basic blanket stitch for the nose and for the whole head. All of this is blanket stitch. I then pin the two pieces together and I sew that down. And you can see what I mean here about having one section on top and the two sections on the bottom. And then I moved houses and moved states and didn't touch this suit for ages, but look, we're back and we're sewing things. So I'm just starting sewing the markings. I started with the big center stripe down the top of the head because why not? Thought it was a good place to start. I didn't film me sewing everything because one, that's boring to watch, and two, it's more frustrating for me to actually get this project done if I've got to be setting up my camera every time. So I'm just going to be showing you bits and pieces of this. This is the whole back section sewn together. You can see I've stitched up those darts that we cut in earlier, and I've made sure that my X's line up on the same side so that I'm doing everything correctly. And then we've got the big stripe down the center as well. And it's really important to test that your pattern pieces fit on your head as you go. So I like to test every time I stitch a piece together, make sure that it sits on the head as it's supposed to. For the neck to start with, I've just sewn the center pieces together and then the other four pieces together. They will be sewn more into a tube on the actual head. The ears, pretty self-explanatory. I've just sewn all the pieces together. This is what it looks like flipped in. So you can see we've got these nice little white ear fluffies. And here I'm just sewing the center piece that has the horns come through it. This is a very fiddly piece, so yeah, it took a little while and it's a bit fiddly because the seams are so little, but just be patient if you have little seams like these and make sure that you're paying attention to what you're doing. Then I just make sure that that fits on the head like it's supposed to as well. And it's a perfect fit over the little horns. Here I am just sewing up the cheek pieces, which have a few more of those darts in there, and our two little purple markings. I had to trim them down a little bit to make sure they fit, but that's okay, you can make alterations as you go if need be. And then I just sew them into their little holes. And this is what it looks like once the two spots were sewn in, and it fits nicely onto the cheek. Now I've sewn up the muzzle and we're going to be attaching the nose to it. I like to sew my noses to my muzzles. It gives a really nice seamless look and I just think it's really cute. So basically I just turn that inside out and stitch the nose in. And you can see here that it looks really nice, it's super cute, nice and squishy, and there's no hard seams. For the cheek tufts, pretty much I sewed them together and then sandwiched them in between the cheek front and the cheek back, and it's a little bit fiddly but it looks super cute when it's done and you get this nice little floppy cheek fluff. So these are all the pieces sewn together. I have one big front piece that is attached to the back just by the top, then I have the bottom jaw separate, the neck piece is separate, and the ears separate. I then start gluing on the face from the nose outwards, going really slowly and making sure to glue down all of the fur so that there's no lumpy bits underneath. When that's all glued on the front and the back, I then use a ladder stitch to just stitch up that little seam between the back and the cheek side. If you don't know how to do ladder stitch, you could go look up a tutorial. It's basically just an invisible stitch that is good for closing up seams on the outside of a project. Once I tie off that end and brush it back, you can't see the seam anymore. And it looks super cute and fluffy. So you can see I've glued down the whole face and the back as well, and I've just left an inch or so of the back unglued so that it's a bit easier to actually stitch the neck on. For the ears, I add about an inch of glue at a time, turn the ear inside out, and then press it down over the top of the foam. And then I just go inch by inch, gluing down a little bit, pressing it in, making sure that it's cooled down before I do the next little section. This again just minimizes any weird bubbly fabric bits that didn't get any glue on them, and it's the least messy way that I've found as well. And then I make sure to go around all the edges and glue those down as well, and glue the face seams down as well so that you can't see any of the foam. then just glue the bottom jaw on in the same way, just making sure to be careful, get all the glue on there, and press it in so that the seams aren't too visible. I make sure to glue around the lip area as well to keep it nice and secure, avoiding getting as much glue on the teeth or the minky as possible. Then I start sewing the neck on. I start from the center front and just sew that two-piece center piece thing on first. This just gives me a good estimate of where the neck is starting, and we just go from there. So I sew one side at a time. For the larger back piece, I do pin it on just to make sure that it fits properly and that it will line up with the other seams, and then I just start doing the blanket stitch all the way down that one as well. It should look something like this when it's all sewn onto the bottom section. And then just sew up those two little side sections left. This can be a little bit fiddly because it is a sort of a form-fitting shape, but it's simple enough, and once you get through it, it looks awesome. This is what it looks like when it's all done. So this is the end of this tutorial. I'm just showing you the patterning and furring today, but I have finished this head now, and the next part should be up next week, showing you how to do the final details. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye!